So quite rightly, everyone's telling us at the moment that this is one of the biggest challenges we're facing in society. It's the biggest shift in societal behaviour since World War II. And the reality is many of us are struggling right now, but we're all at different points in that change cycle, in how we're feeling. And certainly as leaders and entrepreneurs, we need to show a lot of compassion at the moment. We need to show a lot of empathy. And that's particularly because people are feeling two things, fear and anxiety. And they've been spoken about a lot in recent times with this pandemic. And they do elicit the same psychological response, but they actually are very, very different. Fear is a specific response to imminent danger, like a lion's coming at you, and you react, you freeze, or you fight. Anxiety is something quite different. Anxiety is a response to a vague and a future threat. And that's where the majority of us are right now. We're feeling anxious. We might think it's fear, but for the majority of us, it's anxiety. And anxiety is made worse by the threat of uncertainty. It's like the storm clouds of what ifs that are hanging over our heads. What if I get this virus? What if I lose my job? What if my business goes under? All these what ifs, and anxiety loves that. It fuels on it, and our minds then react to it in a way where we play out the worst case scenarios in our minds. But more importantly, what it does is it makes us feel helpless, powerless. We're overwhelmed. And for a lot of people, that can mean we become a little bit paralyzed. Now, remote working, which a lot of us find ourselves having to do now, can amplify a lot of those anxieties. I mean, we always have spoken about the benefits of remote working, the idea that it increases productivity, that it improves the work-life balance, and certainly as someone that promotes future-fit digital transformation, I've been one of the bigger voices out there saying how great remote working is. But there is a darker side that we do need to be aware of, and particularly as leaders of business. Research shows that the vast majority, somewhere between 75 and 85% of people that go through remote working complain of burnout. They're trying to prove that they can still do the amount of work and the type of work that they used to when they were in the office, and they find it difficult to switch off. The second thing that we notice with remote workers is that a lot of them suffer from feeling isolated. And if you think about it, they're used to having very informal and formal social interactions in the workplace, which have now disappeared. And the unfortunate thing with isolation is the research and the studies also show that it's almost 2 times more harmful to our physical and mental well-being than obesity. So it does have some huge impact when you're remote working. I mean, there's a lot of studies around, but remote workers that have been doing it for a while will complain of their inability to unplug after work, loneliness. It's difficult to collaborate and communicate, and there are ways in which you can overcome that, but they complain of the distractions at home and also of staying motivated sometimes. So although there are huge benefits to remote working, there is a darker side that we do all need to be aware of. So for many of you now, you're living in, or your team are living in, what we call the survive mode. Anxiety and stress is experienced by your remote workers, and what it's doing from a brain perspective is activating something called the sympathetic nerve system, and that directs all the attention towards eliminating the threat. Okay? The body's proper reaction to surviving. But when overwhelmed, as we mentioned before, it can lead to freezing up and paralysis. The thrive mode is something different, and that's where we need to try and shift our teams to when they are in that remote working survival mode. And when you're in the thrive mode, it triggers something called the parasympathetic nervous system. And that's all those associated feelings that you get, like joy or excitement or passion or enthusiasm. It enables our minds to broaden their perspectives, to ponder, to be creative, to collaborate. So somehow we've got to work with our teams to, particularly at difficult times, at crisis times, at chaotic times, and shift them from a survival mode into the thrive mode. So how can you support remote workers and shift them to that thrive mode? Well, there's lots of different ways, and I'm not going to give you an extensive, exhaustive list because it will be different for other people, but just to give you some examples, you've got to try and keep things in perspective. You've got to try and help your teams to understand what is in their control and what is out of their control. What am I as an individual overestimating or underestimating? And look, what's the one small little action I can take now that can help? The second thing might be setting boundaries. You know, too much information, too much bad news, talking about certain things like the virus over and over and over again is not necessarily going to help the situation. So set those boundaries about what you are going to talk about or not talk about in the conversations that you have, or the information that you read or expose yourself to. You also need to build help them to build a lot more self-awareness. You know, how are they feeling? If they can start to spot their emotions, spot their feelings, and not criticize, not overjudge, but just be more receptive to it, they'll start to be more receptive to their teammates as well, and show greater compassion, show greater empathy. So building awareness, self-awareness is critical. And as leaders, communication is key. And tell your team, yes, what you know, but in times of uncertainty, also tell them what you don't know. We always think as leaders that we shouldn't tell people what we don't know because that uncertainty is going to lead to anxiety. But the reality is, and research shows, that by not communicating even what you don't know and the uncertainties causes even greater anxiety. So it's important to be open and transparent during times of uncertainty. And there's just some of the things that can help one to shift from that survival mode to that thrive mode. So if you can shift your people from the survive to the thrive mode in uncertain times, the benefits can be amazing. I'll give you an example. Think about the Great Depression in the 1930s, very uncertain times. Now, one particular area that was struggling, as many were, was the industry with natural fibers. So in the 30s in the States, it was very, very difficult to import stuff like silk or rubber into the country. And most of the companies that did that and were struggling, they shut down all their R&D and went straight into survival mode. DuPont was very different. They decided to invest more money in R&D at the time and try and get their teams into that collaboration, innovation space. And by doing that, try and shift them into that thrive mindset. And they did some amazing things. During that time in the 30s, they invented neoprene, they invented nylon. Both of those synthetic materials became invaluable to the war effort in the Second World War. So it's just that idea of shifting from survive to thrive with your people, and there's ways in which you can do it, the innovation, the collaboration, and you can really move your organizations forward in very, very difficult times. So one of the best ways that you can take your remote workers from that survive to thrive mode is through coaching. It can help your team to understand the forces that are constricting them or enabling them in their behaviour. It can help to unlock ways in which they can find to move forward. But most importantly, it's going to build greater competency, resilience, and ultimately self-correction. It's that observation thing. If they can start to be more reflective and start to self-correct, they'll start to move forward and grow. The mental well-being of your teams is critical at times of chaos and crisis, and coaching can be one of the best short-term and long-term investments you can make in your teams.